Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the, well, it's not the shop, but it'll have to do for now. Today, I wanted to take a look at some of the comments that have come in over the last couple of videos of trying to get the Fuso to start, because there are some good and some interesting ones, and I think it's worth taking a look. I mean, clearly, we have to start with Malcolm. Oh, Malcolm, if only I could. Unlike many places in the world, there isn't very much support around here for Fuso, so I'd be lucky to find someone within about a 2-hour drive who'd even seen one of these trucks before, let alone knew how to work on one. But in the comments section, you gotta have a sense of humor. Speaking of having a sense of humor, like Miguel said, I'm starting. Just kidding. And maybe he's right. Maybe the Fuso has a sick and twisted sense of humor as well. But Paul brings up a good point here, and it is something that I've wondered in the past. Back to basics. What's the system voltage while cranking? Low voltage may bugger the ECU. True. What's the status of the immobilizer while cranking? This actually brings up a really good point on the immobilizer because I have 2 keys, and one of the keys doesn't actually activate the immobilizer, interestingly. I found that out a long time ago. But I did have the correct key in, and I can monitor the immobilizer through the Autel Scanner, and there's nothing going on with the immobilizer. It's not locked out. But good question. As far as the voltage, that's also a good question because I'm pretty sure that there are some ECUs out there in some vehicles that if the voltage drops below a certain level, the one I'm familiar with is about 11.5 volts, it will not fire the injectors no matter how much fuel pressure you're making. But that brings us to the next point from Lance. Running a fresh ground wire might not be a dreadful idea. Fuso are known for having a lousy ground circuit, cab, chassis, and engine. And that's a really good point, and it's easy to do. I can just run a set of booster cables from the battery negative over to the engine ground. Now, I am measuring voltage at the ECU, so it's probably not that the ECU is seeing a voltage that's saying don't fire the injectors. So this then raises the question of which happens first. Does the computer receiving a low voltage not fire the injectors, which then causes it to dump fuel pressure so we don't have fuel pressure and the injectors aren't firing? Or is the fuel pressure not building and the computer is not seeing that, so it is not firing the injectors? Well, that brings us to a comment from contributor 7219. And let me tell you, if you're going through my videos and reading the comments to find information, you better be reading all of contributor 7219's posts, because he has got a lot of good information. As far as I'm aware, the chicken and egg start sequence of the 4P10 is ECU commands fuel pressure to build, and then when it sees sufficient fuel pressure at the rail to start, it signals the injectors to fire, rather than if it's not going to fire the injectors, it dumps the pressure. What I don't know is what sensor inputs the ECU needs to see it cranking to command the rail pressure regulator to build pressure in the rail to be sufficient to fire the injectors, and conversely, which of those, if missing, would trigger the ECU failsafe to not build any pressure at all. I'm assuming some inputs would just trigger fault codes if they're out of range, but to me it seems like the ECU is missing something critical. I'm trying to think what it might be that is so important that the ECU just shuts everything down. As an example, like an insufficient or a faulty oil pressure signal. That it fired after you coated the injector tells me that everything is there to fire, therefore it is some sort of intermittent signal or fault, and when you coated the injectors, the ECU temporarily bypassed that signal on the initial test start. And I have to agree with all of that. I'm pretty confident that we need to build fuel pressure first. When the ECU sees the relevant fuel pressure, then it will fire the injectors. Now, since once again, with the Autel Scanner, I can see we are not building fuel pressure, I know the ECU is not going to fire the injectors. And when we're talking about building fuel pressure, there's 2 other things that I can see through the Autel Scanner that I think are pretty key. And that is the condition of the FMU, or the fuel metering unit, which controls fuel going into the high pressure fuel pump. The other one is the fuel pressure regulator in the rail, and that is what controls the fuel going back to the tank. I can see the condition of both of these using the Autel Scanner live while I'm cranking, but I needed to know what values I should be seeing. And thanks to Tyler, now I can. Tyler was kind enough to send me a video of his Autel hooked up to his Fuso, so now we can see what it looks like when the truck starts. Now let's take a look back at what mine was doing last time I tried to start it. Nothing active. I'm gonna cycle the key and see what happens. So now we can see the fuel pump has come on. The pressure regulating valve value has gone from 0.2 to 1. The fuel metering unit has gone from 0.1 to 0.6. And the signal has gone from 8 to 23. None of those have caused any errors. So what's gonna happen when I crank now? Let's see what happens. My truck is showing low 20s for the FMU signal, pretty much the same, 0.6 amps for the FMU current draw, basically the same, and a solid 1 amp for the regulating valve, not fluctuating at all. This is different. And not only is it different, we have confirmation that Tyler's truck is not alone in these readings because Matt gets the same readings as Tyler, which is not the same as what I get. Is my fuel pressure regulator stuck? During cranking, other than the signal to the FMU going up slightly, the signal for the rail pressure regulator didn't change at all, which I find a little suspicious. What I find strange is that I've had 3 different regulators in there. Is it really possible that all 3 are actually dead, or is it that the computer just isn't telling it to do the right thing? Other than replacing the regulator for a 4th time, is there really any other way that I can verify that? I think the other thing that I need to consider is a faulty pressure regulator in the fuel rail. If it's not reporting back to the ECU that the pressure is increasing, the ECU doesn't know that the pressure's gone up. It's possible, but I have my doubts. If you remember, when I put this pressure sensor into the rail, I actually tested it with air first, and with compressed air, I could make the signal change. Therefore, I think the sensor is working. One other question that has come up is, how do you know you don't have air in the system? Well, the Fuso with the 4P10 uses an electric lift pump and it pushes all the way through the system and it's supposed to purge all the air out of everything. Now I have, just to confirm, disconnected one of the plugs that I have at the fuel rail where the injector would connect and fuel comes out there. So I know that the electric pump is pushing fuel all the way through the system. On older systems, yes, you'd have to crack an injector to bleed the air out while it's cranking. You don't have to do that on the Fuso. It is designed so that fuel gets pushed to all areas of the fuel system by the electric pump. So I think it comes down to one of 2 things. Either the pump isn't creating pressure or the regulator is sending it back. How I determine that? Well, I'm gonna have to replace one or the other, I think. But here's the thing that makes me think it's the fuel pressure regulator. If it was a mechanical pump, it should not be able to create pressure one moment and then not create it the next and then create it again. And that's what I've seen. I've had fuel pressure there and I've had fuel pressure not there and then I've had fuel pressure there again with the same mechanical pump. I'm not ruling it out at this point, but I have had 2 different pumps in there that showed no signs of wear on the inside. Again, doesn't mean it's not the pump, but the fact that it disappears and comes back and disappears makes me think it's electrical. Either the computer is telling the fuel rail regulator the wrong information, or the fuel regulator in the rail is not regulating the fuel pressure properly. To me, that is the next thing that I think I need to replace for the 4th time. And of course, it's always nice to see people who truly want to see this resolved for their own sake, just to understand what it is that's going on. And also those who continually have a sense of humor around the situation, like I do, because I have to. I will say that this guy, I'm sorry, humorous, absolutely, but I would trade every video that I have made that you have watched to get this truck running. I hope you enjoyed this different style of video, and don't worry, there's more Fuso coming. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.